something that's been so constant that, for me, honestly, I often forget that we're even at war. And this is partly due in fact that we've been at war since 2001 to the present day in the war on terror. Now, how can this constant acts of war and a constant state of war be allowed in our country is mostly due to the fact of the United States interventionist foreign policy, which is the idea that the United States should react and act upon other nations and intervene in ways that they see to defend themselves and also to defend ethics and humanitarian issues. Essentially becoming policemen of the world, the United States interacts where it deems fit. Now, after doing research on the topic and talking to an NYU student of international politics and international business, I've seen the major flaws of this international intervention policy, in which it creates a system that is very destructive towards the United States in two major ways, in which it creates a heavy tax economically, in which we have to support operations and constant wars that we are constantly getting in the Middle East. And not only does it tax us and is harmful economically, but it also hurts us in our own defense and our own safety, even though that's what we were trying to keep. Because often these interventions create more problems than they solve, and we create more animosity and more hatred and more unrest in the areas we go to try and calm it down. And these both hold back our nation greatly and cause great detriment. So what can we do to solve this issue is that we need to remove intervention policy and then put in place non-intervention policy. Now you see why this is so important when I move on to the first topic of how it economically affects our nation. This is shown by two major factors, which is Operation Cyclone, which I'll go into in a minute, and the War on Terror. Now, Operation Cyclone was a CIA covert operation that lasted 10 years between 1979 and 1989. The purpose of which was to help rebels in Afghanistan deal with Soviet Union influence that was coming in, and basically the Soviet Union influence regime, and topple it. So what we did was, at first in 1979, we started with small aid, according to papers published by University of Colorado, in which we were giving at least $1 million a year at the beginning, which was of humanitarian aid and simple information. But as the conflict escalated and as the Soviet Union became more involved, the United States did as well, escalating fully to giving up to $630 million a year by the end of the project, as well as giving military weapons, like our weapons technology, over to these fighters, most notably of which are the Mujahideen, who were basically the face of this rebel insurgency that was eventually successful against the Soviet Union in pushing it out and toppling the government, leaving an open power vacuum in which no one was claiming the right and someone had to take it for themselves. And the United States, at this point then, backed off and left the situation entirely. Now the cost for this is such in a wide range of $3 to $20 billion because of the nature of the operation, which was a covert operation. No one was entitled to tell us anything. So that these are the best statistics that the University of Colorado published papers could come up with. It's an estimated total cost of the operation between $3 and $20 billion, as I stated earlier, which is a rather small amount when we compare it to what we spent on the War on Terror, which we are currently involved in now. The War on Terror was broken up into two major parts, which was the Afghanistan War and the Iraq War. The Afghanistan War was in retaliation for the 9/11 terrorist attacks perpetrated by Osama bin Laden, in which we went to go destroy and capture his organization and himself and bring him to justice, which was known as Al-Qaeda. And the issue is that Al-Qaeda was being supported and fostered by a Taliban government that was in control of Afghanistan. And so what we ended up doing was completely uprooting the government so that we could get to Al-Qaeda, and we uprooted them and completely removed them from Afghanistan. The issue is that we did this in the first 3 years that we have been there until now, from 2001. This conflict has never ended because the Taliban continues to fight wars and fight with us in an insurgency effort. The other part of the war was the Iraq War, in which which we went in based off of speculations of nuclear materials. This war in itself cost the United States $2 to $6 trillion, according to the Huffington Post. And why it's in this range is $2 trillion was the immediate cost, but the projected cost over the years of the loans and the debts we owe is assumed by the Huffington Post to reach up to $6 trillion. This is a huge amount of money spent. And according to the person I interviewed over at NYU, whose name was James Hu was studying, once again, in international politics and international business, this money, when I asked him if it would make a rather large impact, if it would stay in the United States and not go on the war effort, he said it could have a very large impact. That this money was essentially wasted, because when I asked him if there was any economic upsides of the war, he said none that were not outsetted by the overall cost, and that this would bring it down to almost a complete waste. And so we see that it's been a great economic cost to our nation, and it is holding us back from moving forward, as it's taking money from a struggling economy that we're constantly having to give to it. And this isn't the only major issue. The other major issue is that often when the United States intervenes, we create great unrest. We create lots of situations that go on to haunt us for years to come. And Operation Cyclone is another perfect example of this. Because when we gave aid, we left a power vacuum that was filled by none other than the Taliban. The enemies that we came and are fighting even today were put into power because we got involved and we empowered the Mujahideen to overthrow the government, which was then taken over by the enemies we fight today, who fostered the terrorists who stood against us. And this is all according to the BBC and other news, such as New York Times. And to add even more insult to injury, the Mujahideen, the main group that we supported, one of the members of which was Osama bin Laden, who was actually a commander in it. Essentially, we gave aid and weapons to Osama bin Laden, the man who attacked us on 9/11, and created the basis for the Afghanistan war, which went on to cost us $2 to $6 trillion. So we see that there was a massive cost for the intervention that we committed to in 1979, and that it has cost us greatly. It's cost us over 6,000 United States soldiers' lives, according to the Department of Defense. And it's a cost that we can't afford to keep paying. We can't afford to keep involving ourselves in these issues abroad, because they don't end, as we see that we're still involved in the Afghanistan war even today. So what can we do to stop these shackles that are being placed upon our government, that are placed upon our system due to this foreign intervention policy? We need to remove it. We need to remove it altogether and place it with non-intervention policy, a policy that will avoid conflicts, and a policy that will work towards building our own nation instead of trying to build others, so that we will create a nation that is stronger in of itself, because we have our own flaws and we have our own issues all across our nation, and we should be focusing on fixing them as opposed to trying to fix the world around us, police the world around us. So we can see that it's incredibly important that we stay out of these operations, because they create great unrest. And another example, even today, is one of Egypt. Egypt is a more recent event in which the leader was overthrown and taken out of his government because he was oppressing his people. We had a great relations with Egypt until, of course, he did these acts. And so the next leader that came in, Mohamed Morsi, the current leader, was put into power, and the U.S. immediately tried to gain his favor by giving him military funding, financial funding, and these were large amounts of money that were given yearly to him, in the hopes that he would be a great leader for Egypt. But he went on, according to this article completely in the New York Times, all the different events he took part in. He went on to encourage his people to act out in violence against the United States, against Israel, our allies, in a way that he said that the people of Egypt should encourage a generation of hate against Israel, which is according to the New York Times that he's quoted on this. And not only this, but he's begun to abuse his own people, and even is jailing critics of himself and his nation, doing the exact same thing the previous leader done. And what was our response to this? We continued to give aid, but tried to put more stipulations on it, even though he's still continuing to do these things and accepting our aid. We even gave him 2 F-16 fighter jets. Completely unnecessary for a leader who's shaping up to be a huge problem in the Middle East. So what can we do when we're creating these leaders? We need to stop. It's showing more and more that everything we get involved with becomes more problematic and more dangerous. So what we need to do is cut off our ties. We need to stop this intervention. We need to encourage a non-intervention policy. Because if we are to fight against this, we need to take what was a generation of war and fight for policies and lawmakers who will encourage a non-intervention system so that a generation of war can create a generation